To me, that would look like primarily diverse leadership at the very top. That is not just an individual, but the leadership team that ultimately is racial and ethnic diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of representation around that leadership table. Um, and then, second, a diverse approach to policies and regulations. I believe oftentimes in that we are actively discovering um, far more punitive and far more limited and closed from a diverse perspective policies that govern our institutions and the way we do business. And a organization and or institution that is the exact opposite of that, you only get diversity in thought and perspective and approach to the way you manage your operations by having diverse representation at the very top. And so for me, I would say starting there, but then also over communicating with your primary constituent, whoever that organization or institution serves, inviting in ongoing, constant feedback that allows for your institution to be flexible and open to change as the times, circumstances, and dynamics around us are changing.
And what are your thoughts about the state of Virginia's agencies currently?
Oh, you want to go there? I would say that since I've already publicly railroaded one agency in particular, I guess I'll use them as an example. I think for our most critical agencies, Department of Education, Department of Health, Housing, Transportation, some of the ones that people feel most closely and are impacted by, not only do I believe we don't have diverse representation in leadership, but we also have not been deliberate about developing plans to get there. The status quo is comfortable and it shows in the metrics that the Commonwealth of Virginia uses to measure its success in our communities. If I take my district in particular, I'll use the Department of Health as an easy example and pair that with health outcomes, pair that with disparities and known biases that we recognize exist. It's intrinsically linked to, in my opinion, a structure or structures, I should say, that have failed to adapt and be deliberate about adapting given changing dynamics in our society. And there was a time where I thought the General Assembly, perhaps it was by way of a study, or perhaps it was in the governor's office, was demanding that work occur. And to date, as I've asked questions, I understand that that's not entirely accurate. And so I do believe there is a lot of work to be done in Virginia's agencies. And it needs to start with the representation at the leadership levels. And it needs to start with these agencies being deliberate about what it looks like and what it's going to require to get there. And so I don't want to just flat out say that they failed in that regard. I will just say there's tremendous opportunity.
What work needs to be done?
I mean, I guess if I think about it, I don't know how long this has been, but there was an article, several articles in the fall, I think, when I'm trying to think of my Twitter rants, of the Department of Education having a primarily all white leadership team in 2021 in a state where there are huge gaps in outcomes of Black and Brown students compared to their white counterparts. And that's around the entire state. How, and this is just an example, how do you not correlate the two? How do you not translate that into actual action in the way your organization is structured, your policies, and the approaches you are taking to solving these problems? And I think that's one example of many examples that exist in our state agencies. There needs to be a direct assessment of the metrics that we use as a Commonwealth to measure how well we are delivering on our services to the people we serve, which are the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we need to assess the structures within within these agencies, within our organizations, to determine the direct correlations that exist there. And quite frankly, there's no shortage of data. Like, it doesn't even take that much work because there are numbers of studies that already do this work and looking at these things. And so I just think, I feel like perhaps it's going to take ordering this, but I oftentimes, when I give speeches, when people ask me about going into elected office, I oftentimes say, elected office is one thing, that's great, but really, I need you in our state agencies. I need more people of color. I need more leaders of diverse thought going into these bureaucratic roles, because as elected officials, quite frankly, they outlive us. We come and we go. We have governors that serve every 4 years that can say, I want a succession plan that takes into account diversity, this, diversity, that. But guess what? The bureaucrats are there to stay, and they decide how these things get done and how they get executed or not. And so until we begin to infiltrate these organizations with diverse leadership in every sense of the word, we will continue to be in a perpetual cycle. So that's me on a soapbox, broadly stating many things. I actually think, from a really specific structural standpoint, if there is executive direction that is given to agency leaders that requires them to report back these, whether it's succession plans, whether it's equity and diversity plans. I don't know what the proper phrasing would be, but if there's that level of accountability, that as the chief executive officer, the governor, I want to know the progress my agencies are making in this regard. I believe that is one approach that can be taken, and should be taken, because leadership can flow from the very top. And if it's that critical to you, if you tie that into your own metrics of success, I think that is a really easy way to begin to address these systemic challenges that we are all clear and aware exist. I would also say, and perhaps this is done, I'd have to go back and double check, but the assessment piece cannot be overstated. Anecdotally, we know what staff ratios by race look like in our agencies, but does that live anywhere? Do we track that in any way? Are we monitoring whether or not we're losing ground in diversity and equity standards as it pertains to our state agencies? But if we are not deliberate about that assessment, you're flying blind. Quite frankly, the assessment has to also be part of the development of a larger plan that allows for accountability. And I just don't know that that exists at this time.
Do you know very much about Janice Underwood's role and One Virginia plan, of kind of rehabilitating 100 state agencies.
So I've
need to
heard about the
review.
plan.
Yeah.
First I should say, I believe it's great that the Commonwealth brought on Dr. Underwood, I'm sorry. And I think that it's great that they have given her, in this year alone, additional staff to do this work, which will require significant support. And in the most diplomatic, not disrespectful way I can say it, I have not seen the meat of that work come to fruition just yet. I have seen the plan on the website that broadly references the goals and the principles that is supposed to be executed upon, but I have not seen a strategic plan in a way that allows me to track and measure and see how this plan is being executed upon. And I say all that with the caveat in fully recognizing Dr. Underwood has been largely pulled to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, um, and perhaps trying to travel a dual path of executing on those goals and targets, while also ensuring we have a equitable response to the pandemic. Obviously, that might make it difficult to prioritize, and maybe some of it is aligned naturally, but perhaps has made it difficult to fully bring to fruition what's outlined in the plan.
In Richmond, there are a lot of people who know each other, and whose names can be found in affiliation with more than one institution, in more than one influential position. And that seems to be the way things get done around here. And how do you disrupt that?
History shows us, because it really does, because these power structures aren't new, right? These relationships of power aren't new. And specifically to Virginia, and specifically to just the way power works generally, I think the disruption occurs by those who are wronged by those power structures, and or who are outside of the power structure trying to rectify the wrongs they see occurring. I think by virtue of even asking that question, that perhaps that process is already underway. I think that even the fact that we are aware that these structures of power are largely influencing specific outcomes, yeah, history shows us that for those who are not part of that structure or those systems, unfortunately, it shouldn't be left to them. But the change often comes when they decide that they no longer will tolerate and or accept that system of power and those influences that are occurring. And I don't think that it's left to one person. And unfortunately, history also shows us that either the disruption occurs by force or it happens subtly over time.
What enforcement power, if any, does the state have
Plenty.
when it comes to, you know, making sure that these institutions aren't transacting business as usual?
The one thing I can say is that the power of being in the legislature, I mean, when you say the state, that couples and everyone together, but I'll
Yes.
speak specifically to the legislature. And I just have to say, when it comes to these agencies, you get a legislator worked up enough and it can rock the whole system, quite frankly. These agencies are funded by the state. That means when you control the purse strings, you control a whole lot. And there are people in power even in the legislature, and you get the attention of enough and or the right ones, and it quite frankly can literally, I mean, we are the accountability arm for these agencies. When we order a study by the Joint
Review Committee, or when you know, we call someone in to testify on a particular issue, um, there is power there. I mean, I have seen that play out. And so there's a reason why, yeah, I, I, I just think of so many examples just flooding through my mind at the sense of the question, but there's a lot of power there and a lot of change that can be done. But oftentimes, if you don't know that there is a problem, you don't have exposure to the inner workings of some of these systems, because quite frankly, people, they get worried about their jobs, they get worried about um, retaliation. I mean, that's why we have the office of the inspector general, who has a lot of power that we have given, right? And so I know that there are a lot of avenues at the state level, but it really just depends on, it just depends on the issue. It depends on who brings the issue forward. Um, and it depends on how much information the people who are aware of a certain dynamic or circumstance are willing to offer.